Hey everyone, welcome to the Health Babes podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Becky Campbell with Dr. Krystal Hohn. Today we have Chris Mirabile on, and we talk all about longevity and aging. So he talks about how you define your biological age, which is different than our chronological age, the 12 biological causes of aging, some of the top nutrient deficiencies that impact aging, ways that you can test your biological age, and a lot more. Hey, everybody, let's welcome Chris Mirabile to the show. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. This is a topic we really have not covered, so we're very excited. So why don't you kind of start by telling us how you got into all this? Like, I know you have like a health story of your own, like most of us do. So can you walk us
Yes.
through that?
Yes, it's a long story. It starts when I was 12, but I'll keep it concise. So I started getting interested in health when I was just 12 years old. I started doing pull-ups and push-ups every day, and I was religious about it, watching what I was eating also. And it was exercising all through my teens until I was 16 years old. Actually, today is the anniversary of this event. I was on a school trip in New York City, and I suddenly started feeling dizzy and nauseous. And the next thing I knew, I woke up on the floor with blood all over my shirt. And it turned out I had just had a seizure, and I had severed my tongue from the seizure. And they rushed me to a hospital in downtown Manhattan, where they administered a CAT scan, and they found that I had, as they put it, a large mass above my left temporal lobe. And so they then transferred me to NYU Medical Center, and they found the brain tumor that was larger than a golf ball. They had to remove it immediately and do radiation and so on. And so within just a few days, I was going into treatment, and when it was all over, there was a long recovery period. But going through that experience, it was transformative for me. I made a point to see it in as positive a way as I possibly could. And despite like the challenges and the pain of the experience, I became appreciative for that pain and those challenges, because I was still alive to be able to feel that pain and feel that frustration. And it also then changed my perspective on how I wanted to live my life. I wanted to create the best life for myself that I could. I realized how precious life was and how short it could be. And so I was contemplating mortality and issues surrounding mortality as a teenager, which oftentimes people don't think about until much later in life.
Yeah.
And that planted a seed for me, a seed that eventually, it took a couple of decades, but eventually blossomed into what is now my company, NOVOS. But leading up to that, in my 20s, so prior to that, I studied at NYU Stern. I studied business, and I went into private equity for 1 year. It wasn't for me, but decided immediately to become an entrepreneur. And I started a social network that scaled to over 200 million people's social plans. But all the while in my personal life, I was still focused on health all of the time, right? So I would exercise every day, sometimes twice a day. I would do research on health. I would go straight to PubMed to try to get to the primary sources. And I had a whole bunch of questions that there were no answers to, and I had to investigate and find the answers for myself. And through that journey, I came across a scientific paper in a journal called Cell. It was called The Hallmarks of Aging. This was about a decade ago now. And that paper was an epiphany moment for me, because it basically cataloged the biological reasons why we get older from a microscopic scale. Things like the commonly known ones are like mitochondrial dysfunction or stem cell dysfunction. But then there are less well-known ones like cellular senescence or loss of proteostasis, or the epigenome and the changes of the epigenome over time, and so on. At the time, there were only 9. There are now 12. But that then gave me a lens through which I could look at my health. And I was always asking the question, is what I'm doing good for me, not only in the short term, but the long term as well? I had a unique perspective that most people weren't thinking of. They were thinking of short-term goals like weight loss, or better focus, or better hormones, or libido, and so on. And I was thinking of those things, but then also thinking of the long term. Is what I'm doing actually going to help me or hurt me years, decades down the line? And so this was the right framework through which I could look at all of this and consider, is this going to be good for me in both the short term and the long term? Um, there's more to the story than that, but I've said a lot already, so I can pause there and we can dig in to those hallmarks or anything else you want to cover.
No, that's great. I mean, just using your story, and you've always been intrigued with health, because I've listened to you on a couple other podcasts too, just to get to know your story and things like that. But just that's really been your purpose, right, with working with longevity. So a lot of people may be thinking, okay, how do you define biological aging? I know there's the chronological aging process, right? We all have a number, but how would you define that for someone that's really trying to unpack that?
Sure. So chronological age is how old we are, what we think commonly as, how many birthdays we have had. But biological age is actually how old we are on a biological level. Some of us age more rapidly than others, and some of us age slower than others. And we see this manifested in the sense of how we look, right? So it's not a perfect measure, but it does approximate how one is aging biologically. We all know that 50-year-old who looks like they're 60 or older, and we know that 50-year-old who looks like they're 40, right? And when you compare that 50-year-old who looks 40 to the one that looks like they're 60 side by side, the differences are even more stark. And that goes to show that some of us age faster than others. But what's really important for your listeners to understand is that 90% of that aging process, even more than 90%, is based on lifestyle and environment. And less than 10% of it is based on genetics. And there are scientific papers that dig into this and the mathematics behind that calculation. But I think that that's very empowering. It shows us that the decisions that we are making on a daily basis are impacting the rate at which we're aging. Now, what does biological age ultimately come down to? It comes down to morbidity risk and mortality risk, and then also just our fitness on a cellular and physiological level, both cognitively and physically, right? So if you look at somebody who is maybe 40 years old and they have a biological age that is, let's just say 32, to throw a number out there, that would be 8 years younger. Our risk of death doubles approximately every 8 years. So somebody who is 8 years younger, biologically speaking, has half of the risk of death than the average person that is chronologically the same age as them. So that is a really significant number if you think about that, right? And so that's why I, in particular, became very interested in the aging process and biological age and so on, because biological aging is the number one risk factor for most chronic diseases, everything from cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, diabetes. You go down the list, glaucoma, sarcopenia. Aging is the number one risk factor for all of those. So anything you can do to slow down that process is going to benefit you tremendously in the long term.
Yeah, and you talk about the 12 biological causes of aging. Can you talk about that, like go into those?
Sure. So I can just list them off, I guess. And then if you want to talk about a specific one or a few of them, we can dig into exactly what they mean. Perfect. So the first is mitochondrial dysfunction, which I mentioned earlier. The second is cellular senescence. Maybe I'll give a very brief understanding of what they are. Otherwise, they're just big words that I'm throwing out there. So mitochondrial dysfunction, you've got these are like the power plants of your cells. They're converting the carbohydrates and fat and certain amino acids that we eat into energy. And we have fewer of them, and they don't work as well as we age. The second is cellular senescence. So cellular senescence is when a cell turns into almost like a zombie state. This happens in scar tissue. It happens when a woman gives birth. It happens with cancerous cells when the body identifies them as cancerous and then basically turns them off, and disables them, but is then unable to remove that senescent cell. And the problem with it, similar to a zombie, is that they secrete inflammatory molecules that then cause nearby cells to also become damaged and then increasingly likely to turn senescent as well. So it becomes an exponential process. It's one of the reasons our skin wrinkles, for example, is that we have an accumulation of senescent cells in our skin. Number 3 is loss of proteostasis. So proteostasis is a few things, but one of which is like protein accumulation in and around cells. So if you think about cells, they have these receptor sites and they have functions carrying out within the cells. And so you don't want protein accumulating outside of it. Imagine an analogy would be having like garbage accumulating like in your driveway and at your front door. And then when you walk in the house, inside the house everywhere, your house is no longer accessible and functional. You can't use it the way you otherwise would. So our body should be removing those proteins. But as we age, our bodies are not as efficient at removing those proteins. And what you're going to notice as I continue to go through the list of these 12 causes is that it's a complex web. They all interact with each other. So when one starts to occur more often, the others are also going to follow. And then it becomes a negative synergy or dysergy, technically, when all of these are interacting with each other. So the 4th is altered intercellular communication. So cells are typically communicating with each other, right? And so if you've got like the issue I just mentioned with proteostasis, you've got these proteins that are kind of blocking the receptor sites, then the cells can't release their messenger molecules to each other, and they're not going to be received as well. So that communication between cells starts to break down. And ultimately, our bodies are these vast, complex networks where all of the cells are communicating with each other in one way or another to tell them to do things based on stimuli and even circadian rhythms and so on. And as we age, that becomes less efficient. Number 5 is one that people are probably very familiar with, and they probably overweight the significance of this. It's specifically it's genomic instability, or also known as DNA damage. It is important, and having too much DNA damage can lead to things like cancer, for example. But what was once thought of as being the main reason that we age was called the free radical theory of aging, and it was popularized in the 80s and 90s. And that's where all of the hype around antioxidants came from. What we've ultimately found is that certain antioxidants, for example, are detrimental if you get too much of them, because they are intercepting these free radicals, but these free radicals can also function as messenger molecules, like I was just talking about. It signals to the body. A quick, simple example would be if you exercise, you're producing free radicals. You don't want to blunt those free radicals, and using vitamin C or vitamin E has been shown to reduce the benefits of exercise if you ingest them within close proximity of your workout, because you are intercepting these free radicals, right? So there's a balance to it. You need some of these for the body to be able to properly respond to, insults to your body. So getting back to genomic instability, as we're aging, our DNA gets damaged more and more often. We have molecules and processes in our bodies that can repair that DNA, like sirtuins, for example. But as we age, we have fewer of them, and that process is not as efficient. So there are more and more DNA or more DNA damage that occurs, and then cells aren't functioning as well. They die off, they get killed, they become increasingly senescent, as I mentioned before, and so on. Number 6 is epigenetic alterations. So if you think of your genes that we were just talking about as like the piano keys, your epigenome is like the piano player. This is determining which genes are turned on and which genes are turned off. And when we're young, it's like a symphony. We're playing Tchaikovsky, let's say, right? And it sounds beautiful. But as we age, then we hit the wrong key every so often, or we forget to hit a key. And then ultimately, there are patterns that emerge to this. And this, if you care to talk about biological age clocks, this is the key to that, is that there are these patterns that emerge. But with that said, certain cells start behaving differently than they otherwise would because of these mistakes that happen as we get older with our epigenome. And so that can manifest it in a very significant way. And some people believe this is one of the more significant of the 12 hallmarks of aging. 7 is telomere shortening. So telomeres are the end caps of our chromosomes. They protect our DNA. And as every time we do a cellular division, our cells are going to divide either because they're getting old and we need to replace them, or they're getting damaged from toxic insults, like I was saying. But ultimately, every time they're dividing, those telomeres are getting shorter. And when those telomeres get too short, specifically, there's something called the telomere brink, where if you get below 5 kilobases, which is the measurement for the length of a telomere, if they get below 5 kilobases, that's when health goes awry. You have much higher risks of cancer and other diseases, and mortality as well. Number 8 is deregulated nutrient sensing. So our bodies don't sense nutrients as well, and that leads to things like higher blood glucose, higher triglycerides, and so on. So this is more of a metabolic issue that happens on a cellular level. Number 9 is stem cell exhaustion. So stem cells are the cells that are producing those duplicate cells, the new cells for us. But as we age, they either get damaged, so they're not making perfect replicas anymore, or you have fewer of them. They die off. And then the 3 new ones that were added actually just this year in 2023, after a decade, number 1 is inflammaging. So this is a chronic low-grade inflammation, but it's a play on words, inflammaging, because it comes as a natural byproduct of the aging process. Number 11 is disabled autophagy. So autophagy is when the body is basically identifying cells that are getting older and are not functioning as well, and then the immune system typically will recycle the parts of those cells, the lipids, the amino acids, and so on, and then use that to rebuild brand new cells, for example. And we're not as capable of doing that as we age. And then finally, I know you guys are probably relieved, we're finally at number 12 here. This is the last one, is dysbiosis. And this deals with our microbiome. Our microbiome goes beyond just our gut. That's what most of us think of it as, but it goes into our skin, for example, through the urinary tract and so on. So, and believe it or not, even like the skin microbiome is very important. Simple things like washing your skin too much can then lead to a more permeable skin lining or layer, and then higher levels of internal inflammation come as a result of over cleansing yourself, right? So it's really interesting how all of these things play a role with each other, and ultimately then lead to that aging process.
Like hand sanitizer.
Yeah, right.
I use that like crazy, and I'm like, ah.
And the sanitizer itself can also then permeate into the bloodstream as well, right? So we want to use it cautiously.
Yeah. So thank you so much for explaining all of those so thoroughly. Our analytical listeners are going to love that. So when we talk about nutrients too, right? What are some of the top nutrients that you're seeing deficiencies with that are impacting aging?
So it's a great question. I have a personal blog called Slow My Age that one of my most recent posts talks about my personal diet. But in that blog post, I talk about nutrient insufficiencies, which is actually distinct from deficiencies, right? So if your audience is health minded and they're eating the right foods and they're supplementing, they might not be running deficiencies, which are defined by not meeting the minimum RDA to avoid a short-term illness. For example, inadequate vitamin C will lead to scurvy. So that's how the government tends to think about nutrients. But an insufficiency is actually based on there's a study that looked at the healthiest people per cohort. I believe it was on a decade level. So the healthiest 30-year-olds that don't have diseases, and 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds and so on. And then looked at their intakes of all of the vital nutrients, the vitamins and minerals. And they found, they then looked at the NHANES study, which looked at more than 16,000 Americans and the foods that they were eating. And they computed the intake of all of these vitamins and minerals. What they found was that 100% of people were insufficient in at least one nutrient, but most were insufficient in multiple. So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I do know that for potassium, I believe it was 100% of people had insufficient intakes of potassium.
Wow.
Vitamin D, it was around 95%, which we know everyone should be supplementing with vitamin D. What else? Choline, which is considered the forgotten B vitamin. That was above 90%. I believe it was 91 or 92% of people didn't have enough choline in their diet. Vitamin A was high up. Vitamin E was high up on the list. Vitamin K was relatively high. Magnesium was in like the 60s, I believe, 60% or so. So the chances that even if you're eating healthy, that you're going to be have an insufficiency in at least one of them is almost 100%. So I personally do supplement multi-mineral, multivitamin. I make sure to use a light salt, which is 50% sodium, 50% potassium salt. You can find them easily at the supermarket. Morton's makes it.
What's the brand? You mentioned a brand. I don't mean to cut you off, just for listeners. Morton's, you said? Is that what it was?
Morton's salt. Yeah, the common salt brand at the supermarket. It's typically given to people with high blood pressure, people getting too much salt in their diet, for example. But I think for all of us, it makes sense. Now, you can overdose on potassium, but the odds are most likely that you're not going to. Most likely you have more salt than you need than potassium. Now, when it comes to longevity, I consider these to be general health supplements. There's a difference between general health supplements and longevity supplements. So the way I think of it is these are the ingredients, the molecules that we know that we need in order to not shortchange ourselves with the potential of our lifespan and our health span. So by ensuring that you have adequate vitamins and minerals that have been identified as essential for human health, you're not going to die prematurely, or you're going to, I can't say definitively, but you'll decrease the chances that you will die prematurely or have some sort of illness prematurely, right? Now, longevity supplements, on the other hand, are ingredients that have been found in research to extend maximum health span and lifespan of different animal species. They've been found to have favorable health effects in humans as well. They're working through biological mechanisms that have been evolutionarily conserved across species. So there's every reason to believe that it's conserved within the human species as well. So these are a different class of substances. This is where my company NOVOS specializes in these specific types of molecules that have been shown to be able to have a favorable effect on these 12 hallmarks of aging I mentioned before, and on the overall aging process.
What are they? Like, can you name some, like NAD, maybe something you'd use?
So all right. So NAD is a great place to start. So NAD is involved in the Krebs cycle. This is, part of the energy production process. As we age, we have significantly less NAD levels. I believe since birth, NAD levels start to decline, and it happens continuously throughout our lives. NAD is actually a fuel for what I mentioned earlier, sirtuins that can repair DNA. NAD is needed for the energy production to produce ATP, the energy currency of our cells. And so we want to have an adequate level of NAD, though we don't want to go overboard, because NAD can actually fuel things that are bad, deleterious for our health, right? So you want the right balance. But with that said, you can't ingest NAD. You would have to get it injected intravenous, and it takes hours to do it, and you would have to do it regularly, like every week. And so we don't think that that's the most effective way to do it. The most effective way is to take a daily supplement that can raise your NAD levels. And so for that, what we focus on is an ingredient called NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide, which is a precursor. It is one step behind NAD, and it's been shown in scientific studies, including in humans, that consuming NMN can increase NAD levels in the human body. And then there are a number of different health benefits that can come from that. So that's one ingredient. And that's very popular because Dr. David Sinclair at Harvard popularized the ingredient, and he has a very big following. So whenever he talks about an ingredient, people tend to consider that to be the most powerful ingredient there is, but it actually technically isn't the most powerful. There are other ingredients that are potentially even more powerful than NMN in longevity. They don't get as much focus because there aren't celebrity scientists backing them, but there are very well-known scientists who are very respected in the academic world who are backing them. So, for example, one of those is alpha-ketoglutarate. There's a lot of work done by Professor Brian Kennedy at National University of Singapore. Brian Kennedy actually studied at MIT alongside David Sinclair, but he has kind of avoided the spotlight. But his work has shown that AKG can have favorable effects on biological aging. In fact, he did a study where he showed that they were able to slow down the biological aging based on an epigenetic clock in humans when people were taking specifically the calcium form of alpha-ketoglutarate, AKG. We have that in our flagship product, NOVOS Core, alpha-ketoglutarate, based on his research and other research. Other really promising ingredients, I can just read through them. Some of them might be familiar to you. Glycine, an amino acid found in collagen, glucosamine sulfate, pterostilbene, which is found in blueberries, fisetin, which is found in strawberries, and it has a senolytic property, so it helps to destroy those zombie cells. Ginger is actually a really powerful ingredient, the gingerols specifically within the ginger. Malate, which you can get in the form of magnesium malate, for example, L-theanine. One that's really interesting that is a little bit controversial, but happy to speak to it, is lithium on a microdose level, on a very, very small dosage level. So lithium, most people associate it either with exploding batteries on airplanes or with like psychiatric medication. And so in the psychiatric setting, it's usually used, for example, for bipolar disorder, but it's used at dosages that are 50, 100 times higher than the microdose level. So the microdose level is anywhere between 1 and 5 milligrams. For NOVOS, we zeroed in on a low dosage of 1 milligram as being the ideal. Now, why are we using lithium? So first of all, lithium has been found in our water supply and in our natural foods throughout evolution. It leaches through stones into the water, and so salmon have it in them. Many plants have it through the soil. If you're drinking well water, you're getting it. If you drink San Pellegrino water, it has high levels of lithium in it. Now, studies have found that lithium in the water supply, for communities that have it naturally in their water supply, those communities have lower levels of depression, murder, rape, suicide. So in terms of just like general health for the general population, it seems to be very promising on the psychological level. But it also has positive effects on the epigenome, which we talked about before, which is which genes are turned on and off. And we want the epigenome to be as young as possible. If your listeners do a search for like benefits of lithium, they will find tons of research and legitimate doctors and researchers behind that, even calls for lithium to potentially be studied for the sake of it being a more potent antidepressant than even SSRIs. But the problem is the funding isn't behind it because it's not a patented molecule. So, corporations don't have the interest in studying it for that reason. But it's a really intriguing, interesting molecule, and it's one of the more powerful ingredients that we have in our formula.
Very cool. What about some of the testing you're doing in the longevity space? So can you kind of talk about that?
Sure. So do you mean the biological age testing that we're doing?
Yep.
Sure. So NOVOS as a company, I'll just set the context. We have 3 legs to the company. The first is our formulations. We work with our world-renowned team of scientists and medical doctors from Harvard and MIT and the Salk Institute that study aging. And so that's where NOVOS Core and NOVOS Boost, our first 2 products, come into play. Second is age tests. And so for that, we have a biological aging test kit called NOVOS Age, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then the third is we're a public benefit corporation. So I founded NOVOS intentionally this way so that we could do a little bit more than what a typical for-profit corporation would do for the public interest, because I want to make longevity as accessible and achievable for as many people as possible. It's not what the press would make you think, that it's only for billionaires and centimillionaires. It's actually something that we can all incorporate into our lives today. And I want to try to make that message loud and clear. And so for that, we produce a lot of content. We have more than 150 articles written by MDs and PhDs, fully referenced. We have different tech tools. For example, if you go to novoslabs.com/face age, we have an AI tool that you can take a selfie and it tells you how young you look, as well as different skin health markers, and then gives you guidance for how to improve those scores. We have a mobile app coming out very soon, and so on. So going back to your question.
So many people are going to go.
Oh, there. Yes.
Yeah. All right, great. Well, then they should also check out the questionnaire we have at the top right corner. It says quiz. That is actually far more than just a quiz. So you answer a handful of questions. It takes less than 10 minutes. And then we give you a personalized longevity plan where it's individualized recommendations based on science for what is most important for you and your lifestyle. Like where can you benefit the most to slow down your aging? What aspects of your lifestyle? And then we have articles that accompany all of those recommendations so you could read more, learn about it, and see the scientific references behind it. But going back to the question about biological age. So we talked about the difference before between chronological and biological age. So we have a test kit that measures biological age. It actually measures three things. It measures the pace of biological aging. So this is your current trajectory, if you're accelerating or decelerating your aging, your actual biological age, and then your telomere length, which we mentioned earlier, the end caps of your chromosomes. And I mentioned 5 kilobases as being the brink, and you want to be longer. So this is kind of like a check off the box biometric where you can see whether your number is above that, and if you're in a healthy place or not. So for the biological age clocks specifically, these are measured via the epigenome, which we mentioned a couple of times now, and it's looking for patterns that emerge as we age. And so some of us are going to have older, maybe if you smoked a pack a day, you're going to have older on average, I think 5 or so years older biological age than average. And if you're super healthy and you're eating the right foods and so on, then you're going to have a younger biological age that can be detected through the epigenome. Now, of the 3 tests that we offer in this kit, the one we emphasize the most by far is your pace of aging for a number of reasons. Number one, this is a 3rd generation epigenetic test. There are 1st generation and 2nd generation clocks on the market, including those by big name scientists that are trying to popularize the idea, but they're not as accurate as 3rd generation clocks. We had to license this from researchers at Columbia and Duke University who created this clock. It's the best one out there right now. It has the highest accuracy and precision metrics out there. Specifically, there's a measurement called ICC, which measures the precision of the clocks. Most clocks don't publish this information, but for ours, it's 0.97. 1 would be perfect. And so we're very, very close to having perfect precision with this clock. It's a blood test. So you just prick your finger and then you smear it on an index card about the size of a $50 coin. And then you mail that in, and in about a month, you get your results. Blood is more accurate than saliva tests. There are companies selling saliva for the convenience, but you don't have as good precision with saliva as you do with blood. So I said a bunch about that. Do you have any specific questions about the test? What I can add to it actually is what's important is, as I mentioned before, lifestyle is 90% contributor to your aging, and
Right.
in genetics is only about 10%. So the beauty of this is that you can take the test to start at time point 0. Take the test, you see what your pace of aging is. Then you implement lifestyle changes. We have a lot of advice on our website for completely free things that you can do. You don't have to purchase our supplements. If you want to, great. I can talk about a case study where we showed very significant results for people that take our products. But if you don't want to, that's fine. Then you take the test again after 6 months or 12 months if you want to rule out any confounding seasonal factors and make sure the test is as clean as possible. And then you can see, did your lifestyle changes actually slow down your pace of aging? And if you follow the advice and the guidance that we give, I bet you there's a very high chance that you're going to be able to slow down your pace of aging.
That's
Oh, cool.
So if someone's listening and they're like, okay, I want to know all this stuff, where do they start? They go to your website, and you said there's a quiz, right?
Yeah, so I would suggest for a beginner, someone who's just getting into this, and even someone a little bit more advanced, go to our website, novoslabs.com. there's the questionnaire on the top corner. Fill that out. You're going to get your personalized longevity routine with a bunch of advice on there. Some things, lifestyle changes, people aren't going to be willing to or able to maintain. Others are going to be easy for them to integrate into their lives. So look through those recommendations with a realistic perspective of what you can actually do for your lifestyle, right? But start integrating those changes. Now, if you want to really test this the right way, before even doing that, purchase the NOVOS Age Kit. Do your research, and happy for you to look at other companies out there, but I'm sure you'll be convinced that this is the best test out there. The scientific literature supports it. Then take that test, then implement all of the recommendations on our website. Get lost on our blog. There's tons of content for you to learn from. If you want, try the face age tool to just set a bit like a baseline marker for what your facial age and areas that you might be able to improve for your skin health markers. Just warning, it is very objective. It's a computer, it's AI giving you literally exactly what it sees. Yeah. And so it's not going to be,
so if it hurts your feelings, don't take it personally.
Exactly. Now, with that said, make sure you have the right lighting. Like, you don't want overhead lighting where your eyes look sunken, and it's going to then say you have like dark, under eye, right? But you got to make sure the lighting is right, that you're well hydrated. And then every time you take the test, make sure you have the same conditions so that you can get as accurate of an output as possible. And then consider our supplements, NOVOS Core and Boost. And then finally, if you really want to geek out about it, then go to my website, which is Slow My Age. It's non-commercial. It's just my personal blog. And I talk about the things I do and the results that I get from all of these tests.
Wow. This was so awesome, Chris. We appreciate all the information you're sharing. Where else can people find you? And we'll put all of this stuff in the show notes for listeners too.
So both the company and myself on Instagram and Twitter or X. And then the company is on all of the other social networks as well, like TikTok and Facebook and so on. So NOVOS Labs for the company and Slow My Age for myself.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for everybody for listening. And thank you, Chris, for coming on today.
Of course. Thank you, guys.
We hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you did, if you can pop over and leave a review, that would be awesome. You can also find us over at healthbabes.com, where you can find our courses, our latest book. We also are on Instagram at The Health Babes, at Dr. Becky Campbell, or at Dr. Krystal Hohn. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.